Okay, so get ready, because today we're diving deep into a story that is, well, it's chilling and it's complex.
Yeah,
We're going to New Orleans, but not for the typical New Year's Eve celebration you might imagine.
right.
Um, Picture Bourbon Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, but instead of music and, people celebrating, it's just chaos and tragedy.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to unpack this incident using a whole bunch of different news reports that we have.
Uh-huh.
And we'll try to figure out what happened and why.
Yeah, you know what's really striking is just the utter confusion that unfolded like right from the start.
Yeah.
The sources that we have, they paint a really vivid picture of just absolute pandemonium.
Oh, yeah.
You have bodies flying, people hiding under tables, tire tracks all over the pavement.
Wow.
It's just a stark contrast to the festive atmosphere that you would expect just moments before.
And to make things even more chaotic, the driver of the truck that actually hit all those people, he was wearing a helmet and body armor.
Oh.
And he even fired shots at police officers before he was killed.
It's like right out of a movie,
I know, it's crazy.
But this is real life.
Yeah.
And all that chaos in the beginning, it kind of fueled all these different narratives.
Right.
So the police at the scene, they called it an intentional act.
Uh-huh.
The mayor even went so far as to call it terrorism.
Oh, wow.
But then you have the FBI who initially, they weren't ready to use that term.
Interesting.
So that brings up this question about, what exactly is terrorism?
Yeah.
Like, what are the criteria, and does this incident even fit those criteria?
Right. And this is where things get really interesting, because as the day went on, the story, it just kept evolving.
Yeah.
The FBI ultimately took over the investigation.
Uh-huh.
And that suggests that they may have been leaning toward calling it terrorism.
Right.
So why the change?
Well, I mean, they found suspicious devices inside the truck.
Oh, wow.
And that definitely made everyone much more concerned. I mean,
Yeah.
the bomb squad even had to do a controlled explosion.
Oh, my gosh.
So, imagine if you were a resident of New Orleans and maybe you were planning to be out on Bourbon Street that night.
Right.
I mean, it's terrifying to think that this could have been something much bigger.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, those steel bollards
Yeah.
that they were replacing at the time.
Yeah.
The barriers that are meant to prevent vehicle attacks,
Yeah.
would they have made a difference here?
Right.
The sources mentioned that they were installing these bollards because of that attack in Nice back in 2016.
Uh-huh.
When that truck drove into the crowd that was celebrating Bastille Day.
Yeah.
It just seems like we're constantly playing catch up,
Yeah.
reacting to these horrible tragedies instead of figuring out how to prevent them.
That's a really good point.
And this incident really forces us to think about how effective are those security measures?
Uh-huh.
I mean, how do you protect an area that's supposed to be open and accessible?
Right.
A place where people go to celebrate.
Yeah, it's a tough question, and there are no easy answers.
Yeah, I agree.
And, while we're talking about these big questions about security and prevention, we can't forget about the people who were actually affected by this tragedy.
Right.
10 people died, 35 were injured, and so many others saw this horrible thing happen right in front of them.
Yeah.
Those scars, they're going to last a long time.
Yeah, and that's where these news reports really get to you.
Yeah.
They include these firsthand accounts from people who were right there when it happened.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, there's this one guy, Jimmy Cothran, and he talks about seeing bodies that were just horribly disfigured with tire tracks on them.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's a gruesome detail, but it just shows you how brutal this really was.
Yeah, these personal stories are so important because they go beyond the numbers and the official reports.
Right.
They remind us that we're not just talking about statistics here.
Yeah.
We're talking about real people whose lives were changed forever in just a few seconds.
Another witness, Whit Davis, he talked about how he almost got caught in the attack.
Really?
Yeah, he had just left a bar on Bourbon Street like minutes before the truck hit the crowd.
Oh, my gosh.
Just shows you how random and unpredictable these things can be.
Right.
One minute you're having fun, the next minute your life is on the line.
Exactly. And that randomness, that not knowing when or where something like this might happen again, that's what makes people so afraid.
Yeah.
That's why these incidents have such a big impact, not just on the victims, but on everyone.
Right.
It makes us question our safety in places that we used to think were safe.
So as investigators are trying to figure out exactly what happened in New Orleans, we're left with these big questions about the driver.
Yeah.
Like, what were his motives?
Mm-hmm.
Was he working alone, or was this part of something bigger?
Right.
Was it a planned terrorist attack, or was it just a random act of violence?
Yeah, the sources we have, they don't give us any clear answers yet. But the fact that the FBI is leading the investigation as a possible act of terrorism, well, that definitely adds a whole other layer to this.
Yeah.
It makes you think about global terrorism and how these events can create a lot of fear and uncertainty.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the chaos and the security issues and, the horrible impact this had on people in New Orleans.
Right.
But when you zoom out a little bit,
Yeah.
what does all of this tell us about the world we live in?
I think what's so fascinating and unsettling is that it makes us face some pretty harsh realities.
Uh-huh.
Kind of shatters that feeling of safety that we like to have,
Right.
even in places that are supposed to be for celebration, like Bourbon Street on New Year's Eve.
Yeah, you expect joy. You don't expect something like this.
You're right, and it reminds us that no place is really immune to violence.
It's such a contrast.
Mm,
You think of New Year's as a time for new beginnings and optimism,
yeah,
but this just casts such a dark shadow over everything.
it really
It
does.
makes you think about how vulnerable we all are.
And it raises that question of, who's responsible?
Yeah.
Individually, how do we stay alert without being scared all the time?
Okay.
And then collectively, how do we build stronger communities?
Yeah.
How do we keep people safe, but also keep public spaces open and vibrant?
It's a tricky balance to strike.
It really is.
The sources that we've looked at, they don't give us easy answers, but they do point to some important themes,
Yeah, like what?
like being prepared and communities supporting each other after something like this happens,
Uh-huh.
and having those tough conversations about how much freedom are we willing to give up for safety.
I think one of the things these reports do really well is show the human side of
Yeah.
this tragedy.
Yeah.
Those witness accounts we talked about, like Jimmy Cothran's description of the scene
Yeah.
and Whit Davis almost being there, those stick with you.
They really do. They make this whole thing feel so real.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that these events, they don't just affect the people who are directly involved.
Right? It affects their families, their friends, the whole community.
And as we move on, it's important to remember those stories,
Absolutely.
to honor the victims, to learn from what happened, and try to create a safer world.
It's a call to action for all of us.
This deep dive has been tough, but really important.
I agree.
We started with what happened right after the incident in New Orleans. Then we looked at the investigation that's still going on.
Uh-huh.
And then we talked about what this means for security and for society.
We saw how quickly a celebration can become a nightmare, how even places that seem safe can be attacked.
Yeah.
But we also saw how strong people can be even in the darkest of times.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
We learned about being prepared, the importance of community, and that constant push and pull between safety and freedom.
So as we wrap up, here's something for you to consider. In a world that feels more and more uncertain, what can you do to make things safer, more just, and more resilient?
It all starts with paying attention, caring about others, and being willing to ask those tough questions.
And this deep dive, it's just the beginning.
Stay informed, stay
Yep.
engaged, and stay hopeful.
Until next time, keep diving.